Welcome back to a cold Friday morning.
Wow, seriously?
Oh, that's right. Don't spoil it for the viewers at home.
I still can't believe the groundhog fought a shadow.
That's all silliness. Don't listen to them. Of course, it gets worse after Groundhog's Day, but that's a different story. So we have been looking at all of the cardinal virtues. We looked at temperance, we looked at prudence, we looked at justice. So what we have left in looking at the four is the virtue of fortitude. How did we basically define what fortitude is? Remember when I introduced them to you, I gave you a very basic definition. Pretty much, yes. Thought I gave you more than that, but that's good enough. So. Consistency in doing the good. Also, usually there's usually added to that firmness in difficulties. That's the other part. I thought I gave it to you. Maybe I didn't. I'm a very fallible creature. I'm prone to making mistakes and errors. So fortitude is the constancy in doing the good, which of course, as part of that, requires at times firmness in difficulties. Why? Because many times it is hard to do what we know we need to do. If it was easy, this world would be a far better place, but it's not. More often than not, it is difficult for us to do what we know and believe is right and true and just. And I don't just mean on kind of the grand scale, kind of the so-called heroic virtue. That is a part of it, but this can even be the case in the midst of just ordinary life. Take your lives right now, for instance, as college students. What is the greatest challenge to being a college student? What's the greatest challenge?
I'd say for long, it's keeping my responsibilities balanced, keeping working at school.
For the overwhelming majority of students, I'm not going to blanket you, but for the majority of students, it is in some form of that. The difficulty of balancing responsibilities. Why? Because for the first time, you yourself are responsible for every part of your conduct, right? You're not completely bound at home for your mom or your dad or your parents or your family to tell you what to do. For many of you, this is the first time to be able to be on your own, to do what you want on your own. Yet you still have responsibilities and struggles, right? Your responsibility to attend class, to take notes, to pass the class in order to obtain the degree, in order to obtain further responsibility, but also further freedom. It's a struggle that many college students have, to a greater or lesser extent. Should I be studying now? Should I play my video games? Should I be working on this project? Or should I go out and hang out with my friends? Going back and forth. Why? Because there is the temptation there to give into something that we see as a lesser good. I don't want to make them sound evil, because they're not evil. We need recreation. We need rest. We need time for friends. No man is an island. But we have to balance all of that. And that means at times we have to be strong against even ourselves. Sometimes we can make fortitude to be a kind of external virtue. I need to be strong or constant against those who are going against me. No, more often than not, the greatest enemy of doing the good, I believe, is myself. So fortitude, being the virtue, is, as we talked about some before, kind of the golden mean between two different vices in his terms of constancy and firmness. The one, maybe more obvious, is cowardice. Cowardice in this context is being understood as refusing to take a prudent risk. Refusing to take a prudent risk or sacrifice because of fear. So cowardice is ultimately animated by fear. On the other extreme from cowardice, there is the vice of brashness. Brashness can be described as excessive boldness or foolishly engaging in something. It could be, as it were, kind of looking for trouble, pursuing, seeking risk for its own sake. Kind of so overconfident or so foolish, that you think if there's no way you can be taken down, you can be overcome. You can be overcome. You would say the root of that would be pride in some way. So the exercise of fortitude requires a balance between the two. To not have so excessive of pride to say, it's not possible for me to lose or be defeated or to go down. But yet, more often than not, for most people, fortitude helps us to overcome the inclination to cowardice. Most of us are not really rash creatures. We may be in certain circumstances, but more often than not, we lean towards cowardice. Like the old lion, scared of everything, even his shadow. So we must practice fortitude more often than not to overcome cowardice rather than brashness. It can be easy at times to temper our pride or our arrogance. It's much harder to build up from our fear. Why? Because in a sense, fortitude requires fear. Fortitude requires some sense of fear. Any type of fear. Fear of losing, fear of failure. Why? Because we recognize that we are vulnerable. That's why we're afraid. We're afraid because we are vulnerable. And something about us, or perhaps someone, looking at it perhaps in an external angle, someone may be affected by our actions. This is what fortitude is helping, the exercise of fortitude is helping us to do, to overcome, more often than not, fear. What are some things we might be afraid of that might cause us to not act or pursue the good? I don't want your phobias. What are some ways that we could be afraid.
Social context, embarrassment comes to mind.
Embarrassment, right? We may be embarrassed in some way. Others?
The unknown.
What's that?
The unknown.
The unknown, yes. We don't know what may happen. We may be presented with choices and we're not certain what may come fully of all those things that may happen. Good. The unknown, embarrassment. Others? Yeah?
Maybe like confrontation.
Confrontation, right? In our pursuit of the good, it may cause us to have to confront others, to show that their actions are not right or not good, that they need to turn away from that. More so than kind of over embarrassment, it may mean we may have to come into conflict with others. Not necessarily violence, but at least some sort of conflict may occur. We may want to avoid that. We want to be peaceful creatures normally, right? We don't want people to dislike us normally. No, very good. Any others? Any other fears?
Like if you're a saint,
That can help as well. We have to overcome that fear because ultimately that fear comes out of love. And no, I'm not talking here about the theological virtue of love. Just the normal sort of meaning of love. That is that which we desire. We all desire something. And our fear comes from the possibility we may lose that thing that we love. What are some of those things that we may love that we fear losing? Family. Yes. What's that? Friends. Family. Friends. Others?
Are like livelihoods or jobs?
Jobs. Careers. Yes. Others?
it could be like reputation, your standing.
Reputation. Our social standing. What about even our own life? There can be times where in our pursuit of the good and the true, that it may put us in a dangerous situation that may impact our life. It may change our life completely. It may end our life. So we are afraid of losing our life. Not just everything you all mentioned, family, friends, reputation, but that which is most fundamental to our existence, life itself. But fortitude means steeling myself, strengthening myself, that even if I may lose something I love, that I am still doing what I am called to do, doing what I believe is right and true and good. Who exercises greater fortitude? Superman or Batman? Who votes for Superman? Got at least one. Who votes for Batman? A couple more. Why would you argue Superman exercises fortitude better?
He
be honest, I really don't know the difference, but just like Superman better.
Nothing wrong with that. How do you think perhaps he may show firmness in difficulties and constancy in doing the good? Think of some examples or just general ideas?
Isn't he like a hero?
Well, I mean, they're both superheroes. They're both called heroes.
True.
Who's of those voting for Batman? Why would you say Batman exercises fortitude better?
On one hand, because he has that kind of fear to motivate him and to keep him like grounded towards those he cares about.
Mm-hmm.
I forget what his girlfriend or wife, I forget what her name is, but
That depends on which storyline you're looking at. Let's stick to the very general, before we get to specific storylines.
He goes to protect those that he cares about and makes decisions based on his own life. Like there are times where he lets people who are doing wrong go to protect himself when he's already injured.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other times where he just is absolutely brash and kills just tons of people for seemingly no reason. So,
Well, I mean, does not Superman care about those whom he loves as well?
My argument there, though, is that Superman has less fear to build upon, since he's, other than with kryptonite, he's invincible.
Mm-hmm. Others? Huh?
He saves his own enemies, even if they don't deserve it.
Mm-hmm.
Like the Joker.
Yeah.
Even his other enemies, for example.
Well, I mean, does Superman needlessly slaughter his enemies? Is Superman an exactor of justice in that sense either? No, both of them normally do not kill their enemies. Other thoughts, other ideas? What's the biggest difference between the two? Batman is an ordinary dude, albeit a very rich man. He has no superpowers.
But he's highly intelligent.
Yeah, I mean, usually. I mean, that's not necessarily a superpower in the comic sense, though. I mean, he is rich, so if you want to go that far, you can count that as a superpower as well, because he can afford all the toys. I mean, Superman flies or leaps greatly. Lasers out of his eyes, deflect bullets.
Freeze breath.
Superman has all these powers and abilities. Batman doesn't at all. He's just a guy in a suit. A very fancy suit, very nice suit. All sorts of gadgets. But at the end of the day, he's still just a guy in a suit. Superman is an alien with superhuman abilities. I would argue, maybe you can make up a paper or something to argue if you want otherwise, that Batman exercises more fortitude because he has more to fear losing. Ultimately, his own life even, because he puts himself in danger. Superman is just a part of the job. Oh, well, go stop some robbers. They're going to shoot at me, but it's just going to bounce right off. Superman, yeah, exactly. The only weakness Superman really has in any way is the mineral kryptonite from his own home planet that makes him weak, that makes him more of a regular human. Batman doesn't have a weakness like that. In fact, that's why more often than not it's argued, Batman usually does take down Superman almost every instance he can. Because Superman, to a certain extent, has an Achilles heel. Batman really doesn't. What is it, though, that we praise or exemplify in the midst of talking about fortitude? Well, what is the biggest thing? What is the biggest thing that causes us to have to be constant in pursuing the good, in the midst of difficulties? Because there is the possibility, whether it happens or not, of suffering. This is why we must exercise fortitude. Why? Because in some way we are going to suffer. To endure something we do not want to endure, that is painful or difficult to go through, whether physically, whether emotionally, whether spiritually, whether psychologically. There are many ways that we can suffer. We must exercise fortitude because we will go through suffering. That's the primary reason. Because if we lose what we love, if we are afraid of losing that we love, that causes that suffering. The loss of that which we desire causes that suffering. What is praised in fortitude is not suffering in and of itself. It's not suffering per se. It is not that one goes out and just willingly suffers. That's masochism. That's a disorder. That's not what we talk about in this exercise of fortitude. What we are talking about is that in fortitude, in exercising fortitude, one has the courage to suffer. It's not suffering in and of itself, but having the courage to suffer in pursuit of the good and the true. That's the ultimate thing that is motivating us in exercising fortitude. Why are we willing to suffer? Because it's ultimately for the greater good, right? The classic hero's tale, right? The hero goes on, the hero goes on the immense journey, learns of his quest, is equipped for it, but then must go through some suffering before emerging triumphant in the end. It's the classic hero's tale. All for the greater good. Or we could say, looking at it through the lens of justice, the common good. What is good for all, the sum total of all. It's one thing to know what we need to do. We are intellectual, rational creatures. We can and we do know what we need to do as individuals, as a society, as communities. It is another to have to do it. And especially when people don't want to pursue it. When people remain willful in their own way, resistant to what we are doing or what we are saying or what we are proclaiming. So, fortitude is necessary to help us exercise the other virtues. We can't be temperate. We can't be prudent. We can't be just without fortitude. Why? Because it's hard to change. It is hard to change because change usually brings suffering. Right? We are in the second month of the year of 2021. How many people are still on their resolutions? Not asking you, but just a rhetorical question. How many are still pursuing their New Year's resolutions? Usually, it's not usually the majority, is it? Why? Because if you want a resolve to do something, you have to change. You may recognize it's good, but it's not easy. We talked about that with the example of temperance, right? To go from a state of intemperance to temperance requires a resolution to do so, hence fortitude. The prudence, the right discernment and application of the self. Biggest part of that is discernment. To discern what is right, what is true, what is good. That requires us to have fortitude. To exercise justice between ourselves and others, and even to strive for justice between others, requires fortitude, right? We saw that quite a bit, perhaps, in high school in our own way, right? The place the majority of people despise, and yet we all have to go through it. Bullying, pressure, cliques, clubs, things like that. It's very difficult. But in order to do that, in order to be constant, we have to exercise fortitude. Anything worth doing, anything worth pursuing is worth suffering for. So there are two ways that we can live out or exercise fortitude. Two basic ways. The first way is the method of attack. This is the more active exercise of fortitude. That when we see something wrong, when we see something that is not as it should be, we go forth and we deal with it. So in school, perhaps we turn the corner going towards our lockers and we see a fight emerging before our eyes. Two people fighting. In that active perspective, the perspective of attack from fortitude, we get in between them and we stop the fight. Yet at the same time, we can perhaps do that because we know our capabilities, our strengths, our capacities. We know what we're capable of. Perhaps we are taller and stronger than those two who are fighting. Perhaps we have more authority, more popularity, whatever it may be. So we can step in between them and say, hey, gotta stop. But what if we do not have that capacity? Right?
You should get someone who can.
That's true. But more often than not, in reality versus in school, we can't get someone who can. So we have to go from attack to endure. We must go from an active role, an active exercise of fortitude, to the passive. It's important to emphasize that. The greatest way we do this is by practicing patience. To exercise patience is bearing pains or trials or sufferings calmly or without complaint. Perhaps you've heard before that tired old phrase, patience is a virtue. It's more of a sub-virtue. Why? Because there are times that we can only do so much. There are those times where we discern through prudence that there's only so much that I can do. Because of X, Y, and Z circumstance, there's only so much that I can do. So I must have to endure. I must have to suffer. And it's important to emphasize that because the root meaning of patience from the Latin comes from the word for suffering or to suffer. It's the same actually for passive as well. Known as passio in Latin. Something that one must go through or endure. So when one is passive, one must endure what is coming, whether it's an actual pain or not, but one must have to wait. When one is going through patience, paciencia, one is exercising that ability, as it were, to endure through all of that. As we'll see in going forward, suffering is a part of this world. It is unavoidable. We will all suffer at some point, in some way. No matter how much we may have, no matter how many friends or how popular, there is always some suffering to endure. It must happen, it must come. Why? We'll see as we talk later. But it is a reality we cannot avoid. But it comes in different ways, right? There's the suffering of of being sick, right? Having cancer, having to go through treatments, therapies, chemotherapy. Your body seeming to be at war. There may be the suffering of going through everyday life. How many people suffer through high school? I'm not asking you to reveal that. Like, but how many suffer through school? Any sort of school, elementary school, grade school, high school, college. Suffer in one form or another. They're not physically hurt, usually.
Only in high school.
Hey, the elementary school playground is pretty rough also.
That's
I don't want to,
intentionally is high school.
it's more intentional in high school. We don't always have the opportunity to tackle something head on. More often than not, we have to endure. We have to endure. And in many ways, that's even harder to do than kind of overcoming something and doing what we need to do. Because we want to do something, right? Maybe we weren't strong in high school or in any form of school, and we saw somebody bullying somebody else, but we felt very weak. Or maybe we were the ones who were bullied. And we felt very weak. We felt that we couldn't attack. We didn't have the strength and whatnot. So we had to endure. Perhaps you may be feeling that going through the midst of these classes, this class, for example. Sit here and listen to the professor drone on and on and on about all these things that I suppose I will never have to use or never need or whatnot. Yeah. It's Friday morning. It's very early. The world is beautiful outside with all the snow on the ground. It's a perfect day to stay inside and, to stay away. We have to endure. Getting up, getting here, sitting here, going through class, doing the work that we need to do after this, for this class or for others. We still have to endure. Yeah.
In that sense, could it be argued that endurance takes more strength than attack?
There could be an argument for that. There could very much be an argument that one has to be stronger to exercise patience than to just attack. It can kind of go both ways. It depends on the circumstance. That's why we can't necessarily prescribe which circumstance goes with which. What time may you need to attack? What times you may need to endure, to exercise patience. That's why you need prudence as well. All of these virtues work together. You can't have one without the others. Though we may apply them to kind of specific, unique roles, they still need to work together. You need fortitude to practice the rest. You need the rest to practice fortitude as well, because you need to have the prudence to know which of these two to do. Whether I engage to do what I need to do, or I endure. I wait for the right moment, or I wait for the opportunity. Justice may motivate us towards one of these two, but prudence may tell us which one can work better for that instance. Temperance will say, well, you have this much capabilities, or you have this much equipment or capacity. So, hence why they always talk about fortitude as the one that can at times be the hardest to grasp or exercise or understand, but at times the one that's most necessary. Prudence may be the charioteer of the virtues. Fortitude are the reins, keeping everything in line. So, of course, in looking at fortitude and how it's exercised, fortitude is often one that is demonstrated or modeled the most. We don't, or it's that element that we may praise the most in an individual. Not merely their justice, not merely their prudence or their temperance, but above all their fortitude. In the ancient Greco-Roman culture, this was done in the classic tales of the heroes. Right? To an overwhelming extent, men who demonstrated how they could do this. Men such as, classic tales such as perhaps Jason and the Argonauts, all working together to pursue the Golden Fleece. The story of the Spartans at Thermopylae, the famous 300 Spartans.
Ones that faced the Persian Empire head on.
Right. Well, they guarded the pass at Thermopylae, sacrificed themselves to stop the advance or to slow the advance of that army, so as to give the other armies a chance to rally and to overcome the invaders.
Leonidas was with them.
Well, he was their leader. Yeah, he was their leader. He was their king. So he led them into battle. He died with them in battle.
And his head was sliced off. Put on a stake as a warning.
Oh, yeah. And to our own day, we still have stories of heroes, right? We, of course, have the superheroes, right? Just finished a couple of years ago, the great arc of the Marvel Cinematic Universe with the Avengers, right? All of those things, and, the overcoming of Thanos and whatnot. What might be some other examples of heroes we see in media today?
Sports heroes.
Sports heroes, right? Many people, whether they liked it or not, there are many who were cheering on Tom Brady this past Sunday as they played in the Super Bowl. Why? Because it's rather amazing that someone at the age of 42 can not only still be playing football, but be playing at such an excellent level. That demonstrates a lot of fortitude. It's a lot of constancy in him to continue to pursue the good, and also being able to still have a body to do it. That's just as impressive too.
He spent $1 million a year on his diet.
Well, you can do that, but if you don't have the body for it, if your body's broken, you can't keep doing that. Like, you can spend all that money, but you're not going to have the talent. And hence why Peyton Manning retired at 42, and even then was a shell of what he used to be at that point. Other examples of heroes. Who are the ones that we've been praising for the past year with everything dealing with this pandemic?
Healthcare workers.
Healthcare workers, right? Nurses, doctors, especially those in hospitals, in places that have been overwhelmed at times with the sick, spending hours, spending days even, masked and gloved up, dealing with all these people who are sick, who are dying in great numbers in some places. Not everywhere, but in some places.
That officer that diverted the rain from Mitt Romney when the mob raided the Capital.
Yes, that's an example.
I was going to say in years past, like war heroes, people who've shown significant valor.
Right? We praise those who show valor in war, especially those who give their lives for at least their brothers in combat. We talked about the Purple Heart, right? That's usually given for great valor in action in battle by usually giving your life ultimately for those around you. This is what we normally praise in heroes, not merely or not purely temperance or their justice or their prudence, but above all their fortitude. That they do it. Even though there is something that they love that they fear losing, they still do it. They still do what needs to be done. This also has this also can be shown well within Christianity in those who do that. And the greatest example of this in the history of Christianity are the group of those who offer their lives in witness to the truth of Jesus. Those whom we call martyrs. Martyr itself is a Greek word. It means a witness. It means one who offers testimony in a kind of legal sense. It has come into Christian meaning as those who offer testimony or witness to Jesus Christ, not just in word, not just merely in action, but by losing their lives as well. A Christian martyr is one who is killed because of their faith, because they believe in Jesus. They believe everything that is true, that is true. They're willing to lose their life for it rather than to renounce Jesus, to say Jesus does not exist and that God is not there. Sorry, yeah.
I was just going to ask, like, in the Holocaust, were all the Jews considered martyrs? Or not, because it's a different religion?
Not really in that, not in normally that extent.
Yeah.
You could call it a kind of martyrdom. This is normally, in this specific time, this is usually kind of a Christian meaning.
Like, like getting stoned and all that.
Yes. I don't mean to say by that to belittle anything, but that's not normally the language that we use for that. You could see it as a kind of martyrdom, perhaps, but it's not. That's normally a specifically kind of Christian word. But that's another kind of a religious example as well. The Jews who endured what they endured in the midst of the Holocaust. But yes, in the specifically Christian context, the greatest praise that is offered for exemplifying fortitude are not merely heroes. Greatest example are the martyrs, who are willing to lose their life. They love their life. They do. They don't want to die. But they overcome that fear, endure that suffering because of what they believe is good and true and just. Those are the types of examples that we must hold and look to ourselves in trying to exercise fortitude. So, questions or thoughts on any of that or anything else? You've all sapped your strength of fortitude enough, and now you're ready to go, right? So, for Monday, read up on chapter 10. We're going to start to transition now from the cardinal virtues to beginning to look at the theological virtues. We need to kind of understand, though, the overall picture. We've seen some of this in talking about these things from a Christian perspective, but we need to look more specifically at what is that perspective? What does it mean? What does it say? How then does it begin to apply to us in a moral understanding? So read up on chapter 10, read up on all of that. Make sure you do the participation assignment as well. I will see you on Monday.